come from. This session is presented by the Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology, who also have an engagement area outside in the bazaar. So please do check that out. Not right now, after the session. Our authors, all three of them, will be available for book signing after the session as well. So in case you have any questions and we aren't able to accommodate them right now, please take them outside. Where does fiction come from? What is the process of its creation? How do you make up characters and situations that are believable? And why should the reader care? Four of the world's acclaimed novelists, DBC Pierre, Anindita Ghose, and Karuna Ezara Parikh, alongside our moderator today, Chandrahas Choudhury, share the insights on the art of creating a novel. DBC Pierre is an Australian author who is well known for his black comedies about modern problems. His debut novel, Vernon God Little, became the first book to win both a Booker and a Whitbread Prize, and was published in 43 territories. A lover of fanciful humanity, Pierre is also a regular contributor to the New Philosopher. Anindita Ghose is an author and journalist based in Mumbai. Her debut novel, The Illuminated, published to critical acclaim in 2021, is a bestseller. Ghose is a graduate of Columbia's journalism school and was previously the editor of the Saturday magazine Mint Lounge and the features director of Vogue India. Karuna Ezara Parikh is a poet and writer, former television anchor, and model. Her work has appeared in Vogue, The Wire, India Today, and Tehelka, amongst others. Parikh's novel, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, was published in 2020, and her first book of poems, Where Stories Gather, was published just last year. Chandrahas Choudhury, our moderator today, is a novelist, essayist, and literary critic. He has recently authored My Country is Literature, Adventures in the Reading Life, a book of essays about writers ranging from Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay to Jawaharlal Nehru. He's also the author of the novels Clouds, Days of My China Dragon, Arzi the Dwarf, and editor of the anthology India, A Traveler's Literary Companion. Ladies and gentlemen, where does fiction come from? DBC Pierre, Anindita Ghose, Karuna Ezara Parikh in conversation with Chandrahas Choudhury.
Lovely, a full house, just the sort of thing you want to see in an afternoon. I think William must have decided on the title of this session, because actually the right question to ask would be, where does fiction not come from? It comes from every place, but the non-fiction writers don't understand. When I was 18 or 19, I wanted to be a writer, like perhaps all of us here and maybe many of you in the audience. And for some reason, you know how Indian parenting is. My father took my dreams very seriously and started these juvenile short stories I used to write. He started sending them out not only to friends, but to actual Indian publishers, saying, my son is writing these stories, they're very good. I think he's going to be a world-shaking genius, etc. I don't know how they digested this sort of stuff, but they did. And one day, he said, I'm going to take you to meet a publisher in Delhi. And we went to Sujan Singh Park and we met Mr. Ravi Dayal with his deep voice and his cigar. And I was only 17 or 18, but for some reason I found myself so gratified by being taken seriously by a legend of Indian publishing that this made even me ambitious for my future. And I started, I acquired a printer that year. It was 1998. And as soon as I wrote a poem or a story, I started printing it out and sending it to Raviji directly for comments, very presumptuously.
It sounds like all Indian fiction stems from you, Chandra.
I feel terrible about it now, but at least I can get this weight off my back by confessing, it's like a judge. And one day I didn't hear back at all from Raviji. 2 or 3 weeks passed by and, youth is very impatient. So I thought, I have his number as well. Why don't I just call him? And I took my father's phone book and found the number and called, and the servant or whoever picked up the thing brought Raviji on the line and said, Raviji, you remember, it's me. I sent you these poems. You didn't say anything or write back or say anything, sir. Did you read them? He said, yes, I read them. They were okay, but tell me one thing. Why did you forget to put any stamps on them? I had to pay double postage to the postman. I was so embarrassed because I was so excited that I just dropped it straight in the post box. I have to thank the postman, or maybe not, for sending them to him. But the reason for telling this long-winded story, one is, there's many gifted storytellers here, so I'm getting mine in before we start. And I think many of you are interested in the mechanics of fiction. In a way, to cut a long story short, we're having this panel to put the postage stamps back on the envelope of fiction and find out, all the things that fiction writers, fiction is an art of elision and silence. And many things that you want to say, you don't say it directly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing fiction. You want the reader to understand what you're saying without explicitly saying so. And for that's why panels like this become interesting, because we finally have the liberty to go into the background of where all that work comes from. And I genuinely believe, Jaipur is a place where you meet all sorts of creative artists. It's nice to share your process. And that's what I'm hoping our panelists who have all written very good books are going to do today. So Karuna, if I don't mind, I'll begin with you.
Sure.
I have a long list of entries in my diary about the novels I want to write, as I'm sure you do. And this is the paradox about fiction, that you can see the entire shape of the book sometimes in one blast of inspiration when you're dancing, running, whatever, falling in love. But from there to producing those hundreds of pages is a long, long, long
Painful.
process. And both are somehow true. You couldn't write a novel without some aspects of either of these experiences. So can you give the audience some insight into joining up these two things, the short burst of inspiration and the long process of working in a book?
Well, so my book, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, which we're talking about in this case, it's a story of a Hindu Indian girl and a Pakistani Muslim boy. And it is their love story, but obviously it's extremely political and a very difficult love story. And my story came because everyone says, where did you get this idea? And the idea came from reality, which is I was in the UK and I was studying there. And for the first time in my life, I met Pakistani people. And it struck me as really, really odd that we have this physical proximity, the two countries, but most of us have not met someone from Pakistan. And it was the same for the Pakistani students I met while I was at university. And we became very, very close friends, and we had a very tight-knit group. And there came this point where we were all leaving university to sort of go back to the countries we had originally come from. And there was a realization that we possibly wouldn't ever meet again. And that tragedy sort of sparked the idea. And I began writing the idea down for it while I was on the flight back home. And I was 21 years old at the time. And so that's where the idea came from. To put it in context, I am 37 today, and the book came out 2 years ago. So, to answer your question is shortly that the process is very, very long. But I find very interesting, when we say, where does fiction come from? There's this narrative these days, especially given as a rule to young writers, to write what you know. And I find that a little bit problematic because, of course, you want to write authentically and you want to write honestly. And I think that's where this sentence first comes from, right? This write what you know. But when I think of great fiction and the fiction that has inspired me through my life, it is not necessarily what people knew, but sort of writing more about the world that might have been, or the world that still can be. And that's definitely where my novel, or the idea of it, came from, and where the story, because these are the dreams we have for the world, and this is the world you wish you could have sometimes. So I find that a little problematic, this write what you know narrative in fiction. I don't know about the rest of you, but yeah.
Lovely, lovely. I'm getting from you, we write fiction to bring into being all those other worlds that could be, but for some reason are not. And even that tragedy is what we're trying to. Anindita, would you like to answer the same question? Because I know we used to meet on and off in Bombay or Delhi over the years, and you never ever talked about your book, which perhaps was a conscious decision. You want to, keep it to yourself till it's done. But I think you wrote it in small bursts, separate from your day job, and
I wrote it over 6 years. It's not something I'm proud of. I can see Jeet in the audience, and I know he gave an interview saying spending years of your life on a novel is a completely silly exercise. So, but with the first book, when you do need another job that kind of pays your bills, you're not sure. I haven't studied writing. You're not sure if it's ever going to go somewhere. So you can't kind of make it your primary thing. Now I can, maybe, after having one book out, which has been, sufficiently well received. Yes, I did write it while having full-time journalism jobs. And I think the fact that I was a journalist while I was working on fiction kind of played into the book. It was very interesting to me. In journalism, it's about tangible data, it's about facts, it's black and white, or it should be. Not all journalism is black and white now, and that's a problem. But I feel, with fiction, it's what Daniel Defoe called the novelist's truth. I think it's about studying the ether, it's about addressing inconvenient and intimate truths. It goes beyond fact. And that was very enjoyable to me as somebody who was a working journalist, to explore, the things in between, to talk about things that everybody's thinking, but no one's saying. So kind of studying the ether, so as to say. So that was interesting. That was my process. But also, I don't think novelists become novelists overnight, right? Anyone who's a writer, they've always been writing. I think we come at it from different degrees of confidence, or the support that we've received through our life that you tell people. But everyone who's very close to me knows I've been writing stories all my life. From the age of 10, novelists are those people who make annoying, summer storybooks to circulate to their families. And now I think there's a good trend, so to say, that there are people publishing their first books in their 50s or 60s or whenever they are ready. Not everyone has the privilege to, just devote all their 20s to writing a first book. And I think we should be more open to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pierre, if I might ask you that same question, with reference perhaps to Vernon God Little in particular, the journey from the idea to writing it out. But in your case, I feel compelled to ask another question on top of that, which is that it's not just your books that are made up, even your name is, and what is the story behind that?
Okay, my name is a nickname. It's very old. It dates back to my teenage years, and was given to me by a friend. It's a long story, so never mind, but it stands for Dirty But Clean Pierre. And I faced a problem, I faced a problem when I came to writing a book, because I used that name for 20 years. And then finally I wrote a book, and without thinking, I put the nickname on the book. I quickly discovered it gave me much more freedom than if I used my birth name, which is Peter Finlay, because it didn't have the expectations of my parents. It didn't have the shame. I'd already destroyed, because I lived a bad life as a young man, I had destroyed my family name. And so there were too many feelings, and accidentally, by putting a nickname on the book, I could write as someone else. And it made the work much better and much easier. And so then the only decision was, when I gave the book to a publisher, if I should leave that name. And I thought it would be dishonest to change it in the last minute. And so hence you have me as Pierre. If I get in trouble with you, you can call me Peter. And that's the only time that that's used. As for fiction, I think I quickly came to realize that we're weavers with cloth, with threads, because for me, non-fiction and fiction are exactly the same cloth, only the color changes. And what I mean by that is that, think, for instance, if our father leaves our mother, that's a fact, that's non-fiction. But if you speak to the father about why and how that happened, and speak to the mother about why and how that happened, the narratives will usually be different. And the narrative is truth. That is, all our lives are a narrative built on a thread, which, some of which, as you say, has truths in it, which is what makes fiction sparkle, where you see a truth, that something which you also feel, and which nobody has spoken about before. That brings it to life. But if you think about it, our own life story is that way. Because when we talk about something that we did, another person will have a completely different view. And both are non-fiction. And so I quickly realized that we're simply spinning that same yarn, and it doesn't really matter, because narratives are how we live. We tell our own stories. We hope to get to our deathbed with a coherent story. And you'll notice that our brain is very good at filling in the gaps, so that we remember a conversation and we know that somebody said to us, yes, I will do it. In truth, they didn't say that. They said, well, okay, wait, no, okay, maybe, ta-da. Our brain goes, filters it and goes, it's a yes. And 10 years later, we say, oh, they said yes immediately. This is non-fiction. And that basically is very, very fictional, except for the substance. And so it seemed very easy to weave the same cloth. Also, when I wrote my first book, I was trying to redeem myself artistically. And so it was the cloth of my life to write the book. So the book was my own flesh and my own narrative about a narrative to someone else. And that, I think, is in a nutshell my answer to question one.
Lovely. There's fiction and poetry are often seen as opposing forms. They can't be more different from one another, but there are some places where they actually map on top of each other. Nowhere so, in my view, than in the realm of titles, where, you know, it's, even if people don't read a book, these are the 3 or 4 words that you can be sure at least for 2-3 years everyone will know. Say, those are the words in which even perhaps you yourself have the most investment, because sometimes it's a title that clarifies for you what your book is about. So it could be a sort of driver or motor even making you work every day. I'm going to write, you already know the title of your book, if nothing else. And I would like you in any order to reflect on this and say whether you had your titles before your book or after, whether it really means something very deep for you. And if there's other titles that you admire in fiction, because, you know, everyone, sometimes you can even tell what kind of novelist someone is by the way, whether like long titles or short, abstract or concrete. Where are you on the continuum of titles?
I'll be really quick. My first novel started not only with the title, but with the cover. I designed the cover of the book because I was a lazy child and I thought it's going to be a very long job to write a book and I probably won't do it. So I designed the cover and put the title and hung it on the wall, and then I knew I had to build a book behind it. Since then, I discovered that, in fact, the title is usually in the text. And so now I wait, because when you write the book, something you write inside the book, even if it's not a whole sentence, something will be the title inside. And I leave it until I see that will jump out later in the process.
I can go next. Chandrahas, I think a book's cover and title is, I mean, it's also so much to do about marketing and how the book is perceived. I had a different working title through all the years that I was working on the book. It was long and feminine, and we spoke about this yesterday. I was very keen when my book is out that I wanted, you know, people who associate, you know, in all gender locations to kind of read the book. I didn't want a pretty floral cover and a feminine title, which would only appeal to women. I wanted a black and white cover. I wanted my cover to look like a Franzen or a Philip Roth book. Why not? So my editor at HarperCollins kept saying it should be a big book title. And I'm not sure what I understood from that, but it went from The Moons of Their Lives, which was my title for 5 years, to The Illuminated, because we agreed that it was a big book title. So yeah.
Gosh, title. So like you, I had the title right at the start. The title, so the book is called The Heart Asks Pleasure First, which is actually a line from an Emily Dickinson poem. And it was already used in a different piece of art, I'd say about 25 years ago, when Michael Nyman, who's a beautiful music composer, used this for a track in Jane Campion's film, The Piano. And interestingly, I hadn't read Dickinson's poem, but I was in love with this piano track. And I would listen to this piece of music again and again and again in the time where I was spending time with these Pakistani friends. And so it really echoed that. And I thought this is such an interesting combination of words. And when I looked it up, I found out it was an Emily Dickinson poem. And the interesting thing is the second line, which is it goes, the heart asks pleasure first and then excuse from pain. And because this is a love story about two people jumping into something that is obviously going to be doomed because of their nationalities, it made perfect sense to me. So I had the title and I held on to it. And many people told me, this title's not going to work over the years. And then finally, at the end, everyone agreed that I could have it. And I was absolutely thrilled. And it's interesting because you made that, you spoke about poetry when you asked this question. And I do find that poetry does lend to titles very, very beautifully and very naturally. And we see that in India a lot with Indian cinema and music, right? So many of our greatest films in Indian cinema take their titles from tracks in previous movies, right? Which I also love, that kind of intertextuality.
Well, I'm sure Emily Dickinson would be delighted that you have resuscitated this phrase, and I'm having read some of your work, you have earned it. So win-win on all counts.
Thank you.
I've often, when you meet other novelists, for professional reasons, you might discuss everything but novels. But sometimes on places like this, you learn so much about one another they wouldn't sitting in the author's lounge. I also like reading books by novelists about novel writing, and there's a lot you can pick up from there. And Orhan Pamuk is someone who's written very interesting things about what novels are, what they do. And I'm going to read out a couple of sentences. In particular, Anindita, I want to ask you about this, but everyone else can take it up. You would have thought that novels are so big and so fat that they don't leave anything unsaid. Everything they want to say, they do in the pages, but apparently not. And this is Orhan Pamuk. The center of a novel, he says all novels have a hidden center. It's not clearly apparent what that center is. The center of a novel is a profound opinion or insight about life, a deeply embedded point of mystery, whether real or imagined. And the center can't be very easy to reach. You have to do the work as a reader to reach it, because if the center is too obvious and the light too strong, the meaning of the novel is immediately revealed and the act of reading feels repetitive. Which is to say, even if you're reading a book for the first time, if you know what it's really trying to say, it's not so interesting. And in particular, this line, Anindita, if the center is too obvious and the light too strong, there's lots of light and dark in your book, and the whole book is there's a light motif in it about light. What kinds of work did you have to do to make that shading more discreet, to make sure that it all held up?
So, I think that I don't like novels that are too didactic. I don't think books, this is my personal opinion, I don't think books should have a single moral conclusion. I like books that take you to a place, but don't decide for you, right? So it's about leading the reader by hand to a space. So I agree with what you're saying in the sense that, what one has in mind as the defining, say, blurb in your head, it can't be too direct. It can't be a square. It needs to be more circular to allow kind of room to navigate. And I didn't have that line immediately when I started off. For me, stories start with a visual or with a charge and emotion more than plot and narrative and characters. I think those can be kind of colored in along the way. The Illuminated has a lunar scheme. It's about the greater light. In the Bible, there are two lights. There's a greater light and the lesser light. And I feel that the moon, which has all these feminine associations, has always kind of been the lesser light. And I wanted to, I use this metaphor of light to kind of challenge that why should the moon just be reflected light or the lesser light? So it's about women coming into their own. It's about the moon having its own light. That's a kind of background lunar leitmotif for me. The line that I kind of developed maybe 2-3 years into it, that ultimately became a blurb somewhere, but it was only for me in the beginning, is when the light shifts, you see the world differently. So for me, really, The Illuminated is a book about a shift in perspective. And I think light is such a strong metaphor, you know, all the way from the Upanishads to Virgil to Rumi to Audre Lorde, that it was a very all-encompassing and beautiful metaphor for me. I did read a lot of poetry while writing a book. I think that's something I love asking novelists. What were you reading when you were writing? And I was very careful about not reading new novels or, you know, books by friends that were just out, because I feel your brain is so fertile when you're writing that you tend to absorb everything. I don't mean it in a sense of plagiarism, but everything impacts you. And I think poetry is a wonderful thing to read. So I was reading this book by Carol Ann Duffy. It's a collected book of poems about the moon, and a lot of Sanskrit poetry, which plays with light metaphors and moons so well. So yeah, when the light shifts, you see the world differently was really my kind of core in a sentence for my book.
A short history of literature and composition. I think you've improved on Oran Pamuk.
I not to challenge Pamuk, but I also question whether that center of a novel is different for every reader. You know?
Good. Yes, that is a rich thought. Yes, we could go all the way down that line of inquiry, but there are a few others.
We can ask one by one.
Pierre, is there something you want to say about that? Or perhaps I can ask you a separate question. I remember reading a line in Vernon God Little where the narrator is going somewhere. I think it's off to Mexico. And it's just a little sentence: power lines and fence posts go past like sheet music. And you know, the suddenness of the metaphor is, to me, expresses the essence of literature, that you do very big things very fast. And combining that with, Anindita, your thought of there being a lesser light and a greater light. One of the problems of writing novels is that you have to, language is a resource that we all share. But as writers, you have to turn the lesser light of banal language into the greater light of the particular language of a book, which has its own style, its own rhythms, its own metaphor. And I'm always curious to know, what do you do? Because we live in the lesser light in our daily lives. Maybe some people bring up the best in us. But is there something you do every morning to reach up into that more rarefied world where you can then write with that real feeling of passion and
It's called coffee. I know the world is very strange. I mean, there are many answers. Each person and each writer will have their way. I completely agree with the metaphor of light and of music. And in fact, music uses light very much and brings things to light in the same way. But at the end of the day, the world is very strange. We are strange people. We live a often manufactured narrative and a very curious reality, which is fragile and balanced very finely between our sensitivities and complete destruction. The world around us is constantly doing new and alarming things. And that by itself, I think, is enough to make me want to get up and write. I have to say, if I was a musician, then I would play music. And I think I only write because I can't play music. Music is more immediate, but it is simply to express how the light shifts and how strange the viewpoints are, even with ourselves. What a violent discovery it is when each of us could have reacted badly to something, and the next day we see it in a new light and go, thank God I didn't say that. Or we feel bad because we did say it, and now it's, oh, now we have to apologize. The shifting of values around us is, for me, the environment of a novel. And of course, I like throwing a character into the middle of that shift and make them struggle, make things difficult for them to understand. And in that respect, they reflect my own life, absolutely, as I'm lost 99% of the time. But that's where we're supposed to be. And, my strength comes from telling the story and trying to work it out.
I really like what you said about that, and I was thinking about how with fiction, it is often about having a 360-degree empathetic view.
Empathy is the
Empathy is,
key, is
yeah,
the heart.
because
Absolutely.
that is, you are essentially each of your characters.
You
are each
inhabit your
story.
characters
Yeah,
without judgment, which I think is so
Exactly.
important. I think fiction can teach empathy better than any kind of moral didactic lessons can.
and it's the suggestion rather than the telling, right? And I think that's good storytelling, because the other word for fiction is storytelling, right? And I think that's, and coming back to what you were saying when you were giving the example of the parents, it's just storytelling, all of it, whether it's non-fiction, whether it's your journalism, whether it's my poetry, it's storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but I don't know if I got an answer out of you, Karuna and Anindita, about
What was the question?
it was about
precisely?
what you do on a daily basis to make language come alive so that you can write your best or write your best self.
I have a slightly, unpopular take on this, because I know we are always told as people who are working on our fiction, and when you're in your 20s and a writer tells you, you have to get to your computer and write 500 words every day. You have to write this much every day. I don't think that works. I think it's a little bit about consummating a love affair when the passions are at peak. So I feel abstinence actually from the active writing process until you're ready has been very useful for me. And I think as writers, even when you're not in this active phase of writing, you're kind of getting your creative nutrition, you're building things in your head. So I think it's good to do that and actually come to the place where you are actually drafting when you're fully ready. So I don't have a cute daily routine so that I can write better, because I have work and I have jobs and I have to look after my plants and actual chores. But I think that kind of abstinence from writing is a practice that has really helped me, that you come to it when you're fully ready. I think that works.
I can't tell you what a relief I feel hearing you say that, because I always, as a writer, feel terribly guilty that I'm not sitting down at my desk every morning and writing whatever 1,000 words or 5,000 words that I'm meant to, or that I'm meant to aspire to.
Who made that rule?
Gosh, really hardworking people. But I, like you, I usually wait. I'm always thinking about writing. I don't know if that counts, but that is part of the process of writing as well. I'm sitting with my story all the time. The other thing that works for me is that I write poetry as well. And I will say this, that I'm writing poetry far more frequently. And I think writing poetry and being consistent with writing poetry has changed the way I live my life as well.
Yes.
Because there is a there is a beauty to life, and I think much of writing fiction is noticing the beauty and constantly keeping yourself open to that, and also the pain. I think that's there as well, and from where we were talking about empathy, from where that comes as well. But you can't shut yourself off. So I think it is very often writing fiction is about living life, really pushed up against the edge of life.
Yes.
So you notice the color of the sky, you notice the bougainvillea outside and how gorgeous it is, and maybe it's okay that we're here in spring and not winter. You notice how the shape of someone's glasses, and all those things are part of storytelling, right? All those things are where fiction come from for me.
Yes, exactly. The reason why I feel in happiest writing novels, I remember, Anindita, in the early pages of your book, there's a bit where a character is very well dressed, but someone notices, or the narrator notices, that the back of his shoes are a bit scuffed. And so there's a bit missing from the entirely carefully prepared picture.
The narrator never notices, the character notices.
Yes. And fiction writing encompasses so many different kinds of noticing and making of meaning that I wonder what among all these things is for you the most powerful draw in going to your desk to create every day? Is it building up characters? Is it narratorial description? Is it creating an entire frame where meanings are made and remade? When do you feel most alive when you're reading or writing? What part of fiction really makes you feel this is the essence of it all? And it's a different answer for everybody, I suppose.
That's a light question.
Or you look at me now. Or you get the easy question. What part of fiction switches me on?
For instance, I could imagine making a guess for you. It's doing voices. That could be, it's.
I like dialogue. Yeah, because it's musical as well, and that's where people hide all their secrets in their dialogue. It's always about what they don't say as much as what they say. So it certainly is people communicating with each other, and also the settings interest me very, very much. And when I was a child, when I was small, I lived like an only child in a big house, and sometimes I would be bored, and I used to build from cardboard little towns and cities. And back in the day, products like cornflakes used to come with a toy in them, and I used to collect the toy. I hated cornflakes, but I used to collect the toy. I would tell my mother that I was going to eat the cornflakes. I never did. But I used to build towns for these toys, and with streets. And so the notion of building places interested me very much, and then putting people to act in them.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to finish with two short ones. Karuna, there's a bird I noticed, a very beautiful, the cover of your book is lovely, and there's a bird on it. What kind of literary bird is it? Is it a simurg or what does it stand for?
So the wing metaphor goes through the book. I actually want to say, I don't know if Shiloh is here, the artist. I don't know if she's here. Anyway, so the cover was created by Shiloh Suleiman. And it was very interesting for me because she is half Muslim and half Hindu herself. And it was very important for me that this artist creates the cover to this book. And she did a wonderful job of it. And the wings metaphor goes through the book. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but that's why we see the repeated motive over there. And this piece of art was actually from a series she was working on about mythological winged creatures, female winged creatures. So yeah, so I'll just say that there's a little bit about it in the book, but I don't want to go into it too much here.
I'd like to answer the previous question, adding to what Pierre said. I think, selfishly as a novelist, when you embark on a novel, it is the writer's terrifying dive into the unknown. Unlike, say, journalistic writing, where you kind of, even though while you're collecting empirical data, you kind of need to pitch a beginning, middle, and end to your boss. You need to chart out what you're saying. I don't think that's enjoyable when you're writing a novel. It has to be a process of exploration for the novelist as well. I like that. But on more practical terms, I also really love the process of building sensorial worlds rather than, say, details of geography or, physical details like clothes and, that. I love, in the Illuminated, since there's a mother and daughter, I tried to build different sensorial worlds because the chapters are alternating. And maybe these are things that only the writer notices. Maybe no one other even gets that except you and your editor. But I love doing that. So there's a different temperature scheme and color scheme and senses that the mother and daughter have. And it was actually Akhil Sharma who I interviewed at Jaipur. He's a novelist I really admire. He was here 7 years ago, and he said that he had used only 2 senses in writing Family Life, the audio and the visual. And I was really quite taken by that. So the mother in my book has a sense of her chapters are taste and smell, and the daughter, who is more superficial, is audio visual. And when they meet in the last chapter, it's all the 5 senses. And that was really enjoyable for me to build that sensorial scheme.
Yeah, as a novelist, you have to do your own emotional and physical set design in a way, isn't it? Okay, my last question before I finish. In the world of novelists, nobody is more resented than the comic novelists because, to be able to make someone laugh page after page after page means that all the readers gravitate towards you. So there should be some special taxes to be paid at every panel by the people who write in a comic key. But since I'm the moderator, I'm exempt from that. But we must ask, Pierre, you've got to entertain us with something right away to earn your keep, so to speak. And why don't you tell us a funny story about? Oh, William has a pet bird. Why don't you tell us a story about an Amazon parrot with, let's say, a sub-theme of advertising?
An Amazon parrot?
Yes.
Well, it's not. That's a tragic story.
Tell us that story. If you can tell us a story about Amazon parrot, you've already, it could be any story, but this is amazing that you already able to take it
Well,
up.
there is an interesting thing. Okay, comedy, in the same way that genius and madness are a circular spectrum. And I believe when they touch, you die, or you lose it. And I think comedy and tragedy are similarly on a spectrum. And the closer you can get a laugh to the tragic, the more funny that is. That's the human instinct. I know at the moment it's being destroyed by people who are more sensitive, and that's fine. But I think that is the psychological function of the human function of comedy. Did you want an actual funny story?
Yes,
or what?
you've got about a minute before we take questions. So,
Okay, well, the Amazon parrot wasn't particularly funny. I have bad luck with parrots. So I'll tell you I can tell you a story from Ireland about a man who lost his wife. This is obviously a tragic tale. On the west coast of Ireland, there used to be many lobsters in the sea, and fine big lobsters, Atlantic lobsters, but they were overfished and they're kind of gone. And a man on the bay there one day, his wife goes missing, and he can't find her. And eventually he has to inform the police. And there's a very tense wait. The police go searching for this woman, wonderful woman, 30 years of marriage. And finally one night, a knock on the door of the man and the guards, the policeman comes in with his face down and says, "Seamus, I'm sorry," he said, "I've got really, really bad news." So also some not so bad news, and actually some great news. And Seamus said, "Okay, well, what's the bad news?" So we've found the body of your wife. So, oh my God. So what's the slightly better news? Said, well, they pulled her up from the bay, and there were 12 of the finest Atlantic lobster clinging to her body. He said, well, okay. He said, what's the great news? They said, we're going to pull her up again tomorrow.
You win. You've done it. Wonderful. Can we have some questions from the audience? I know we are a bit short of time. Sorry for that. You, ma'am, over there. Yes, in the third row.
Hi. So I'm a non-fiction author and I'm trying to move into fiction. And my question is that while you're writing, like while you're just in the writing process or in the beginning, are you thinking about what elements will make it a bestseller? Or are you even, is that even a thought in your mind that, you know, ye wala part relate karega logon se, like it'll make it a, you know, it'll make it go viral or something like that. Or in your case, like MSS, you've mentioned, kabhi ye thought tha that it might create a controversy or something like that. Is the how your writing be perceived a thought while you are writing? Or is it like कि I want to write this, किसने पढ़ना पढ़ो, नहीं पढ़ना मत पढ़ो. It's like that. Like
okay, maybe you can take a couple more questions and you can answer whichever one you feel is right. Someone else at the back, perhaps. You, ma'am. Yes, over there.
Hi, thank you. I'm Shweta, and I just wanted to ask, one of my biggest fears, I feel, is telling the one story that I have to tell. As fiction writers, do you ever feel that you might have told all your stories and you don't know where to go next from here?
Well, there are two debut novelists on stage, so that's a very dangerous question for us
I know,
to
I'm so
encounter.
sorry,
but Pierre, would you like to take that since you're not?
Let's have a quick couple more questions and then we can be done. Who else wanted to ask? Yes, you, sir, and then you, ma'am, and that's it.
Okay, now you are the writers and we are the readers. When I read a fiction, I just go through the, I'm just interested in the characters and the story, and I'm not after the writer. So what do you feel when you are writing a fiction? Are you just focusing on your characters and the story only, or are you ever thinking about the readers, how they are going to look into it, how they are going to accept it or not?
Good
And
question.
once you write the book, do you read them again and find, or when Chandrahas write about a review and they criticize it, how do you feel it?
Okay.
I
Last
tell you
question.
This
over
question
there.
is for
That's
all
the
of you.
same. That's the same as the first question. Never, just really quickly, never think about the reader. Never do that. Look, think about
All of
yourself.
you?
Please yourself. Please yourself because you don't know who the reader is. If it's a spy novel, then you have to think about the plot, obviously.
Okay, so it's one way.
Yeah, but in literature, don't think about it because you'll imagine who they are and you can be wrong. Think for yourself, and other people who are like you will come to you. It's magical.
Over there.
Hi, I have a question because, over many sessions, I've been hearing people say that they've been writing books for 7 years, 3 years, 10 years. And I'm wondering, does it take that long to write a 500-page book? I mean, I don't understand it. So
We're
I'm
being
really
accused of being
happy you
lazy.
explained it.
Not hardworking enough. Okay, we've got a minute and a half.
The quick answer to that is yes, it does.
Thank you.
Because you're also editing. I mean, the 5 years involves, you've probably written the whole book in 2 years, but you don't know what you've done. So you're rereading and editing it all that time, or you scrap everything and start again. But it does take time, yes.
She's not talking about the 8,000 hours of naked fear and terror. We do that for free.
Okay. So now you want to say something?
What was the question in between? It was.
Do you think about the different elements of, like, do you construct the elements of your story while writing, saying this is what I want readers to feel? Or,
Okay, well, we kind of answered that. Yeah, I think you have to, a spy novel, you have to think about how it's being read, but in literature, not.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to say we've run out of time. We should always have 1 2-hour session, I believe. But it perhaps a bit presumptuous to say it should be asked, but I think it was a very good conversation. And if you have questions, you can always ask them while buying a book for the writers. So then they really feel pressured to answer it, in a perhaps more serious way than they're doing right now. So you can take them up on that in the signing tent over there. And thank you so much for being a great audience. This was really good fun. And to you all as well.
Thank you, Chandrahas.
We'd like to thank DBC Pierre, Anindita Ghose, Karuna Ezara Parikh, and Chandrahas Choudhury for taking us and deep diving into the world of fiction. Indeed, I agree with William as well. You can find the author signing stall right here. Please exit from there and form an orderly queue, hopefully. All 3 of them are going to be available outside. Get your books and your questions and meet them outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much.